Hi, and welcome everyone. And thank you for joining us today for the webinar From Data to Impact Stronger Stakeholder Reporting with Copilot and Power BI. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder of a few webinar housekeeping tips. Please feel free to use the Q&A, chat, or raise hand features throughout the session. We want this to be interactive and useful for you. We will also be sharing the webinar recording and the slide deck after the session. So with that, I'm excited to turn this over to our speakers, Brenda Kaler and Stephen Weiss.
Hi, everybody. So excited to be here with you. My name's Brenda Kaler. I'm a senior director here at Armanino, and I lead our nonprofit technology practice. So I have been chatting with lots of my colleagues about the intersection of nonprofit and technology, specifically about how nonprofits can use technology more. So today I'm excited to have one of my colleagues, Stephen, with me. Please go ahead and introduce yourself, Stephen.
Nice to meet everybody. So I'm a solution architect in the data and AI team. So I probably have 10 to 11 years of experience across Power BI, using it as a tool, both from a business side as well as from a consulting side. So kind of both sides of the coin there. And I've been intimately involved with AI and its multiple iterations as it's sort of rolled out over the last few years. So kind of excited to bring my experience with the tools forward, like how this intersects with nonprofit, and actually like dive into the tools with you. And so a lot of this will be kind of talking about it and also actually seeing some of it in action. So excited to step through that with you.
Really excited for that. So our agenda for today, I wanted to just briefly touch on the current nonprofit landscape, what we're seeing in the market, where nonprofits are adopting AI, and where we see the best use cases for. And then we're going to dive right in. Power BI for nonprofit, then Copilot, and then we're going to show the two of them in action. We will have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. However, if you do have any questions as we're going along, please feel free and put those in the Q&A section so they don't get lost in the chat. For those of you here, if you want to drop in the chat where you're calling in from today, and if you have any experience with Power BI or Copilot, kind of what your level of experience is there, so we can make sure and tailor this directly for you today. All right, so let's dive right in. Nonprofits have been facing a lot of struggles is maybe the understatement of the last couple of years. So from the Nonprofit Finance Fund, they have said that it takes a nonprofit organization 1.5 times longer to recover from a recession than another organization. Said another way, nonprofit organizations' budgets and financial landscape tends to drag the general economy by 18 to 24 months. So all of the activities, if you could go back just a minute. So all of the activities that we have seen in the landscape for the last couple of years are really making themselves evident in all of the activities that we're doing as a nonprofit to either raise the bridge to bring in more revenue or to lower the water to reduce our expenses. So next slide. And so thinking about raising the bridge or lowering the water, where can we increase our operational efficiencies, analyzing purchasing and kind of reducing our costs? We can increase our revenue, or we can do a transformation of our organization. There aren't a lot of levers that we can pull. So increase revenue, decrease expenses, or modify the organizational structure or the mission or the culture or something about the fundamental kind of basis of the organization. Or we can look at mutual aid kind of scenarios where we're partnering with other nonprofits, where we're engaging specifically with our communities and our business partners and our donors. All of these options can use AI as a decision-making partner and also as a canary in the coal mine. How can you spot these trends sooner and do scenario planning for those inevitable outcomes to make sure that you don't have to get to the point where the only option to reduce expenses is to modify staffing? Because there's so many options. If you can spot things soon enough, that is going to be the last option. Next slide. So thinking about, kind of what it looked like before AI, a lot of manual model building, a lot of Excel documents with 25 tabs, version control is difficult, all of the different people and the security setting. Oftentimes those files get corrupted. Always at 10 p.m. at night. You're working alone against a deadline. And it's very reactive. Somebody would always come to my desk and be like, Brenda, can you I'm like, stop right there, whatever you're about to say. I cannot just do anything. Everything is manual. Everything is hard. Everything takes way longer than I think it should and you think it should. But that's the reality. And so with AI, we're able to make data informed and data driven recommendations and do predictive risk assessments to be able to do scenario planning with, well, what would it look like if we didn't make that hire until mid-year? You can ask that in natural language and it'll redo the forecast and the budget. So things like that make it more conversational and make it easier to do scenario planning. And so a lot faster, reduced data load. You don't have to be a whiz at pivot tables and SQL and embedded if statements. You can just talk to it in natural language. Next slide. So how do you turn data into decisions? And that's kind of what we're talking about is nonprofits are sitting on a mountain of data and information about the people they serve, about the people who donate, about the landscape in which they operate. And how are you taking all of that information and turning it into knowledge? And how do you take that knowledge and turn it into the ability to make better and more informed decisions, to be able to spot patterns, to highlight trends, to be able to notice what is really at the heart of the matter and kind of separate out all of the noise so you can focus on what really matters. So accelerating the close cycles as the world gets faster and more driven toward automation, the continuous close becomes more of a thing. And so real-time information becomes more and more important. You can't wait until the books are closed once a month to have accurate data. That's just not the speed that business works at these days. And so being able to improve your forecasting accuracy to deliver those real-time insights is getting increasingly important. Next slide. So I wanted to just throw some general AI use cases up here to kind of get you thinking about kind of the progression of AI and the things that you can start doing right now and a specific nonprofit use case. So productivity boosting, everybody's using, ChatGPT, Copilot, those kinds of things, embedded intelligence and workflow, starting to kind of build some AI into some of the workflow. And then decision making, that's where we're bringing in BI and Fabric. We're going to talk about data warehouses. I think all of that today with Stephen. And then we're getting into the agentic AI, where you've got autonomous workflows that are operating with human supervision. We always like a human in the loop. And so then you've got this AI workforce where people are kind of maintaining the bots. You don't have to know how your microwave works in order to be able to heat up food in it, but you need somebody to push the buttons and make sure it works. And so that's kind of where I see the agentic AI heading, especially for nonprofits. Next slide. So this is just kind of the picture of the human in the loop. We don't want these things to just run, especially when we're talking about financial postings and operations. We don't want things to just hit our general ledger without us having some breaks, some controls, some internal checks and balances to be able to make sure that that is ready to go. So we're saying that it augments decisions, not replaces them. So thinking about how can you start with this right away and what are your use cases? So thinking about what are the problems you're trying to solve with data silos? What are the problems with information you need to fulfill a grant report that's coming from 6 different systems and 12 different people? So thinking about how you store data is the first step to thinking about how you can harness it for maximum potential to lay AI on top of it. We do have AI readiness programs that can help you kind of envision what that entire workflow and cycle would look like. So with that, I will hand it over to Stephen.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. And I think what we wanted to do with this, obviously, that's a lot of information, a lot of capability inside of what you can do with AI. It's also a little, how can I say it? It can be a little scary at first to think like, well, how do I get started? I've stood in rooms and spoken to groups, and I think that the general consensus here is most people have explored or interacted with an AI like a ChatGPT, like a personal account, but like the transition of how to use AI inside of business or inside of work is a little less clear. And so what we wanted to do here was kind of first start with the basics, assuming that maybe some of you aren't even familiar with Power BI. So we're going to start with Power BI. We want to explain a little bit of like what it is, kind of where it sits in this information landscape. Then we're going to talk a little bit about Copilot, what it is, where it sits in this information landscape. And then we're going to tie the two together. So it's not entirely technical, but there'll be little bits in here where there'll be a little bit of technical bits. So if you have questions, drop them in the chat. I mean, I'm, again, happy to answer them at the end. If there's something pressing we want to address kind of in mid-slide, we're happy to kind of break in and sort of answer that. But let's just speak specifically to what Power BI is. So as I mentioned before, this is a tool that's been out for 10 years. I've been fortunate enough to be using it for 10 years. It started, coincidentally, it was an Excel add-on. So this was a tool that lived inside of Excel from like 2010 to 2013. So if you were an Excel person, I happen to be an Excel person just because it was interesting to me and I was trying to solve problems with. It was sort of like born of trying to help people do things that were not IT people. So Power BI's roots were always around it being a tool for non-IT people. So, kind of Excel is that same tool. Anyone can open Excel and make a list and work with it. You don't necessarily need to be super expert level Excel to do that. And that's kind of where Power BI was born, was trying to help people get to that next level. 2015, it sort of emerged as its own software. Like you can download Power BI off the internet right now, off of Microsoft's App Store. That's kind of where it entered into this like popular lexicon. And by 2018, it was basically a mainstream player. So this is something now that is ubiquitous across most enterprise organizations, most mid-sized organizations, even just like small independent shops. Like Power BI is basically now a mainstream analytics tool across the industry. And what it does, if you've never used Power BI before, what I can describe for it is number one, it's sort of a different approach trying to get to analytics. So, prior to sort of Power BI being out there in the ecosystem, if you wanted to have data analytics, like you had to send a request to an IT organization, somebody had to spin up a database for you, had to either know like access, or they had to have a SQL box somewhere that they could say, okay, here's your data. It usually had to be governed outside of, inside the IT organization. Well, Power BI, its whole intent was to bring that capability to a business user, to an end user, to a citizen developer, to somebody who's like, I have data in front of me. I just don't have the IT tool set in these things to do stuff with it. So Power BI was the bridge. And what it is you can actually go into the Microsoft App Store right now. So if you were on your computer, you can open the App Store. This is a picture of it here. And you can download Power BI for free. Microsoft's probably one of the greatest things they did with this tool was they just made it free. They said anybody can use it. Anyone can download it. It only works on Windows machines, though. So if you're on a Mac right now, you can't download Power BI desktop, but it's free. So and that was one of the big promises with it, is that you could go play right now. Like there's no license that you need to get to open this program on your computer today and start exploring it. And what it opened up was a way for individuals to connect to over 300 different kinds of supported data sources. So, we're using Salesforce, or we're using an Azure SQL database, or my organization has stuff in ADP. Like you can connect to data without having to understand how to connect to data. And so as Brenda was mentioning, you can have these powerful tools in front of you. You don't need to know how it works. It just says, pick your data source, you select it, and you can start pulling data in. So it's kind of bringing forward a lot of these capabilities to people who may not have otherwise thought they could do something with it. And so what this means is that, from very little, having very little, let's say, IT background, or yourself, if you're just like, hey, I want to start exploring some data, you can open Power BI, you can connect to multiple systems. So what is the power of this tool? It's that you can go out, you can connect to multiple platforms. So maybe you have a CRM, you have a fundraising platform, you've got a bunch of Excel files or CSV files. Like you can bring all of those files together into that Power BI report. and you can start to do things with it. Obviously there's scales to it. It's not necessarily that you just and it's done. Like, there's a little bit of a learning curve to like how do we write formula the same way as Excel. Obviously you're stepping up with it. But once you have it set up, one of the benefits of Power BI is that you're refreshing against that source system. And so what you're not doing anymore is you're not exporting stuff once a month and pasting it in an Excel and then having to do that again and again. Once you build it correctly in Power BI, you're refreshing it with just a push of a button, or automatically once you have it set up in the service, it's pulling that data in automatically. And so this is kind of like that first step in, oh, wait a minute, we have something that's like a living dashboard. We don't have to keep rebuilding this report every month. This is now just pulling the data out every month, and we're getting some updated metrics. And so we're moving towards this universe of where everything was kind of static in Excel, to now you have a tool in front of you that's fairly easy to use, that you can connect to source systems and have data being refreshing. And so what happens with this story, and if you think about like what I see in my role as a solution architect, is you have organizations that are sitting in these different maturity levels. This sort of like some, and we talk to them all the time, they're perfectly comfortable in Excel, and maybe they're almost their entire business is run in Excel, and maybe they're exporting data from various platforms and it lives in an Excel file, and every month they update it, and you know what, it works, right? But these tools have natural limits. And so what we're pointing out with this slide is that it's best to bring the right tool when you need to use it. And so Excel, wonderful tool, but like one of the known limits of Excel is that you can only have about 1 million rows, right? If you tried to put 1.5 million rows of data in Excel, it would tell you can't, right? So that's a natural limit with Excel that I think most people can agree upon. What Power BI does is it kind of provides a little bit more of a grounding for you to work with more data than you could with in Excel. So those limits in Excel of having 1 million rows, those don't exist in Power BI. So you can bring in 10, 20, 100 million rows of data into Power BI, and it feels and will work much the same way that Excel experience was. And so what you have in Power BI is you have the ability to transform data, right? So you could say, oh, I need to clean up this table, or I need to take these two things. And in Excel, maybe it was a VLOOKUP. Now in Power BI, you can use just a query editor, and it's very like push button, very easy to use, and join tables together. And so it's bringing a different tool set forward for you to be able to interact with data. But Power BI has natural limitations as well. Even though we're touting it in this, it's very good up to a point, and that limit is sort of heavy transformation. So if you're taking big tables and trying to join them together, join them, eventually it will just kind of like struggle with that. And so that last level of maturity and what we kind of aspire to as organizations is having sort of a scalable governed data platform. This is the data warehouse that Brenda was mentioning early on. So it's sort of the progression. I kind of think of this as like the maturity progression as organizations come to a realization of their needs. Like nobody goes out and says, I need a data warehouse. That's usually not the first thing out of their mouth. It's usually like, oh, we've got all this stuff in Excel and we want to do some reporting. Great. Oh, look at Power BI. I can do this. And they start moving that direction. And eventually, like with all things, you reach that natural limit of what the tools can do. And you have to sort of graduate up to the next one. It doesn't mean you don't need the other tools. It's just showing you kind of that you're going to be on a journey. If you haven't used Power BI before, if you don't have a data warehouse, it should be kind of in your line of sight, but where you sit on this maturity curve could vary. So that's Power BI. We're going to show it sort of at the second half of this. We'll kind of demo a couple things with it, but let's talk real quick about Copilot. And I think at this juncture, most of you on the call have probably heard of Copilot. Copilot being Microsoft's AI entry into the field. It's sort of a direct kind of answer to some of the other AI tools out there. So if you've heard of, you've got OpenAI, right? So that's kind of ChatGPT. You've got Claude Code from Anthropic. You've got the other AI tools. Google has sort of Genie, and you have a bunch of tools essentially at your access. What's unique about Copilot is that Copilot is directly integrated into the Microsoft 365 universe. It's directly integrated into Word, Excel, PowerPoint. It's also directly integrated into Power BI. And so what it's doing is it's giving you access to that, like, I want to talk with my data. I want to ask questions of it. I don't necessarily want to have to sort of go through this entire action of building out a full-fledged report just to get this one piece of data. Like, the idea here is, can I just feed it a CSV file? Can I feed it an Excel file and ask questions of it? And to a degree, yeah, you can. That's absolutely. So if you have Copilot licenses within your organization, this is something that's worth testing out. In fact, I used Copilot to build this image. So you can see the prompt that I used at the bottom there. I said, hey, build me an image for this PowerPoint presentation. To a degree, you could use Copilot to build a PowerPoint presentation. It's not perfect, but it certainly can help you sort of move the needle. So, a lot of times when we talk with organizations and they're like, well, I don't know how to get started with AI at work. The simplest answer could just be, well, why don't you just start talking to Copilot? And some people, like the sort of the light bulb moment for them is they can really talk to Copilot. There is a way to turn your microphone on and actually have a conversation with Copilot. So a lot of times that's the first step. We'll just tell individuals, you know what, if you don't really know, just talk to Copilot. Actually talk to it and have it talk back to you. And you'll find some interesting things happen there. But then the next level is like, oh, we've got Copilot. What can we do with that? And so I assembled a list here, and I think it's helpful to know, as we mentioned, Copilot is embedded in Teams and Outlook and Word and PowerPoint and Excel. It's sort of like, well, what does that mean? And so kind of that next step of like, well, how are we supposed to be using these AIs in our job? And so, a simple one, and if you have a Copilot license and you haven't tried this yet, is just to say, hey, what are the top 3 things I should be paying attention to today? And what's it going to do? It's going to go through your email. It's going to go through Teams. It's going to look at the conversations and the stuff that you have. And it's going to try to return some answers and say, hey, you know what? You should probably respond to this and should probably do this. And so it's very simple questions that you can ask. And Copilot, because it has access to your M365 universe, it has some context on what you've been doing. It can sort of provide some direction, and it doesn't take much to be able to prompt it. Like, that was a very simple prompt. What should I be thinking about today? Or what are the top 5 things I need to get done today? When's my next, so the sky's the limit on the kinds of questions, but those are sort of like very easy starter questions that you can ask. If you're building a lot of things, let's say in PowerPoint, and you haven't explored Copilot's ability to build PowerPoint presentations or just individual slides, it's something to explore as well. I mean, it can really save you time if this is an area where you find yourself doing a lot. You're building a board report, and every month you've got to assemble this PowerPoint deck, and you're like, you know what, this is taking me 3 hours every single month. Like, it's becoming kind of annoying. Maybe there's a way for me to start to leverage Copilot or some of these other AI tools to help. And there absolutely 100% is. And I think the first step is just understanding, what are the capabilities of the tools and where can you leverage them? And so, sharing this, not because it's specific to Power BI, but because it just goes to demonstrate different ways that you can start to enable these tools to help you with your work. And as Brenda mentioned earlier, there's immediate time savings that can be garnered just from like thinking about the things that you do or that your team does and saying like, hey, is there a way for me to potentially make this faster or to save me some time from doing it? And so that's kind of the number one piece of advice here is just don't be shy about getting started. Okay, so we're going to pivot back to kind of what Copilot looks like inside of that M365 universe. And so I took a screenshot of it, right? So this is my Copilot, like, because it says, hi, Stephen. And the idea here is now we have a Copilot that has access to not just my Office data and my Word documents and my email. It has access to other things inside of this sort of like now this online universe. And so what it can do is we can actually start to ask it about data. And so this is a Copilot that can actually see my Power BI reports. This is a Copilot that has access to things that we've published in the Power BI service environment. And so this is a Copilot that is sort of in that, think about all these sectors of Copilot, this one can see the data itself. And what you can do now is you can start asking questions of it. And so there's like a little chat interface right there. You see it on the screen. It's got prompts on the bottom that try to guide you. And really what it allows you to do is just say, hey, I want to ask some questions of the data. And so maybe out of the gate, you're like, I don't know what questions to ask. This is all new to me. And so we're going to walk through this a little bit with like some examples. And so the example we want to use is, let's say that somebody built you a nonprofit Power BI report. And, in the spirit of this presentation, I used Copilot to build me a sample data set of nonprofit data. And so Copilot went out and it built me tables, right? So I'll show you what those tables are in a minute. But, the idea was I didn't want to pull forward specific data from organizations where we've helped build Power BI reports or where we've helped sort of develop something. So this is 100% a fictitious nonprofit Power BI report. But the idea here is that it's
Copilot is great at generating data too.
So if you didn't know, you could build data out of Copilot. It's certainly something interesting. And I really didn't give it a whole lot of direction. I just said, I want to build a Power BI report. I need some sample data for it. And what it did was it actually built something on it. If you're looking at this carefully, it's kind of across a year. We've got revenue and expenses, and it's sort of telling me my net surplus based on that revenue and expenses. It created departments, and it even showed me that some departments have no revenue, right? These departments don't make any money. They just are an expense on the organization. And so that actual amount here on the right is showing you just that sort of that pull. And you can see that grants management is sort of bringing in the lion's share of the revenue. So a very interesting Power BI report. Again, here just for demonstration, but one of the things that maybe you would want to do is you'd say, well, I didn't build this report. I'm trying to consume it. Like, what kinds of things should I be thinking about with this? And so you can use Copilot out of the gate to kind of help you, one, decide what kind of things you want to report on. So Copilot as an AI, like, it doesn't just have to take your direction. You can ask it maybe for advice on, what are the things that we should be thinking about building a report on? And so maybe these are some ideas. Like maybe it's going to say, hey, we should be looking at campaign monitoring. We should be looking at program participation trends. Maybe you have some screenshots of some stuff that you've done a prior year and you want to feed that to Copilot and say, hey, we've got a team, or we're going to engage a consultancy to help us build a Power BI report, but we're not really sure what we want to build. That's kind of the first step here, is you can start to use these agents to say, well, help me help myself. And, it'll feed back some ideas. And in fact, these were some of the ideas that Copilot fed us back around maybe what we want to be targeting. And so when you think about now, kind of, again, coming back, here's this report. We can use Copilot to come up with ideas to build a report. But once we have the report built, here's kind of where it gets interesting. So this report that I built was called Nonprofit Report. So you can see it in the top right. Here's what I asked Copilot to do. So I pointed Copilot to this Power BI report. Remember this one right here. And I said, summarize this report for me. And so what happens is Copilot, and you can see the answer underneath my thread here, Copilot went out, it read through that report, and it fed me back some information. And what did it feed me back? It kind of gave me some context here. So the organization reported a net surplus of this. It provided a visual. It actually pulled that visual out of the Power BI report and presented it back to me. If you notice at the bottom of this, you can actually see that you sort of link to the report. You can explore the answer more. So I didn't have to open this Power BI report. Like, I didn't even have to know what was in it. I just asked Copilot, summarize this report. And we'll show this in action when we get into the actual Copilot. We'll do this exact exercise, and you can kind of see what this experience is like. And so the idea here is Copilot is this layer that you have available to you to interact with this data. Maybe you're like really into going into the Power BI report, and that's great. Like, and you can. But there's others that might say, you know what, I don't want to take the time to have to figure out and read through this. Let me just ask Copilot real quick. And so you'd be surprised at what you can learn kind of in that sense. And so it's fed me back some information on it. Now I wanted to challenge it a little bit. And so what happens here? So now I took it to another level. I said, and the question I asked it was, hey, what company was responsible for the largest donor revenue contribution in May 2025? That wasn't in the report. Like, that wasn't something that I had available in Power BI. I don't know that answer. Like, it wasn't something I could have surfaced in that Power BI report. So then what Copilot does is it asks me some clarifying questions. Like, what do you mean by donations? And so I'm answering that. And then it's going into that actual data set. So now Copilot's going one layer deeper. It's not just going at the report and giving me a visual. It's going into the underlying data set of that report. And it's digging through that data, and it's actually feeding me an answer. So it says, what company was responsible for the largest donor revenue contribution? And it gave me an answer. This was not in the Power BI report. This was in the data underneath the report. And what Copilot did is actually showed me how it got to that. So it said, you asked this question, and this is what I did, and these are the tables I hit. And so you're not just limited in the questions to what's visible in the Power BI report. You can actually go underneath into the data. And that's what makes this really powerful, is you can start asking it things that aren't immediately obvious in the report, and it's going to be able to dive into that and start to give you answers back. Does that mean that answer is right? Well, that's a good question. I don't know. So it says AI generated content may be incorrect. It's always good to have kind of a general, cautious optimism about these things, but certainly it's something that you would want to verify before you slap it into a report or put it into a board report. It's a good tool. It's sort of an ally in finding the answer, but you to still verify the things that you get from an AI tool. So what Copilot can't replace, and I think this is sort of, where a lot of organizations have great optimism. We want to start with Copilot. We want to be able to start building things, but you need a couple things before that works, right? You need clean and well-defined data tables. Like, you need clean data. So if you have a messy data environment, you're going to have messy results. And so before you can get really good things from Copilot, you need to have your data in a location where it's together, where the headings make sense, where it's been cleaned up, that you kind of like deduplicate things as needed. So that's a prerequisite. Like, that's something that should happen first if it hasn't happened already. So, if you're trying to just slap anything at Copilot, you're not going to necessarily see the best result. And the other thing that you're not seeing under the hood here, and if you're not familiar with Power BI, what you're looking at in this right table, these are the actual tables. Remember I said I had Copilot build me tables? So those are the tables. And those lines between them, those are the relationships between the table. That tells me, how does this department relate to this budget table? And so it's kind of establishing the connections. And those are the connections that Copilot needs to know in order to be able to tie everything together. So if I didn't put that there, Copilot's not going to be able to do that on my behalf. So these tools are good, but you sort of still have to paint the target for it before it can go out and do that deeper analytics for you. And so it really can't replace good data governance, having your data in a consolidated, clean, well-governed space. There's sort of an importance of, you might hear talk about, we need a data lake, or we need these things. Just because your data is all together doesn't necessarily mean it's going to surface like wild insights and it's going to change the world. Like, you have to also have sort of some strategic thinking about, well, what data are we bringing together and why are we bringing it together? The AI tools are good, but they're not going to replace the need for being really intentional with what you want to do. And as everything else before, and you're hearing it, it's like you need to build these foundations. So if you're interested in having predictive analytics and sort of being on that bleeding edge of where AI is going, if you don't have the foundation in place, like if your data is still siloed across the organization and it's in all these other SaaS products and it's buried in CSV and Excel files, it's not going to work. So what you have to do is lay down those foundations. These are activities that we do fairly commonly, which is just to help organizations understand, okay, well, how do I move from where I am to where I want to be? Like, what does that roadmap look like? What does that sort of progression look like to get through those steps? And so with that, we want to take kind of a pivot here and look at the individual tools themselves. And so again, with the understanding that maybe many of you have not interacted with these tools before, I'm going to pull up the first thing. And what I'm pulling up here on the screen, this is Power BI Desktop. This is that tool I said was free to download off the Microsoft App Store. And so it's a Windows software product. You open it, and I've opened it up now, and it's got nothing in it, right? And so I'm not going to build a Power BI report in front of you. I think that, the gist of this is just to show that first point of entry. And what I think is interesting here is that when you go to say, well, what can I connect to out of the box? And like, okay, I've just downloaded this, I've opened it. And what I think, remember, we talked about like 300 different kinds of connectors out of the box. And so I'm going to just scroll through the list here. But these are the things that Microsoft has built in that are immediately available to you without having to like set up additional software, without having to build in APIs. Like these are native connectors inside Power BI that can connect to that, whatever tool, like, oh, okay, this is Microsoft Exchange Online. Hey, this is a data lake storage. Oh, this is Business Central. So you have at your access a ton of out of the box connectors, and here's kind of going through an alphabetical list. But you can see here that if you see something on this list that you're using and you're saying to yourself, hey, you know what, like we've struggled, we're exporting data from that tool and somebody's pulling up, it's worth to just open this tool up and just click, and you have to authenticate into the tool, but otherwise you should be able to see that you can pull back data right away. And so what that looks like then as you're pulling back data, remember we talked about this journey, it's like when you're pulling back data, what are you getting? You're getting tables, right? You're building tables in Power BI. You're sort of taking and saying, hey, again, remember I had Copilot build these are the tables right here. So here are my tables. And what I'm doing now is I'm working inside of, you're going to notice some labels up here. I'm off of the desktop tool and I'm now in the cloud environment. So Power BI works perfectly well on the desktop. It will, you can build your report end to end. It doesn't have to go online. Like it's totally de-risks. Like there's no harm, no foul, right? It's a one-way street. Like you only pull data into Power BI. You're not pushing data out. So there's really no fear of like, oh, I'm going to screw something up because I import. No, you're not going to screw anything up. So, but to a point, once you want to start sharing things that you've created, you have to put it online. So Power BI also has an entire web interface, and that's kind of where we're at now. And inside of that web interface, I'm just showing you some of the tables. So here's my account table, my company table. So these were the tables that we had Copilot create, right? Each table has columns in it, right? So this is showing the columns. And so what we do in sort of this progression of creating things is you have your initial tables, and then you have to establish, remember we talked about before, the relationships between the tables. And this is that screenshot that I took. Here are those relationships, right? So we took the tables, we connected them. This is actually where we can sort of author those relationships. And so what we're doing here is we're connecting the DIM company, and right, there's probably a company key in this table. So if you're not a database person, it's not a big deal. Again, Power BI really tries to make this approachable. But what we needed to do was kind of put this together, and within very little bit of steps, then I basically have this Power BI report. And so this is the Power BI report I shared on the webinar. And if you've never used Power BI, pretty interesting tool, right? Because you can start to set up those sort of report interactions that were not easy to get out of an Excel, right? If you have like multiple, let's call it function types or departments, and you wanted to sort of filter down through the report and see like what the impact was, you build one report and then you sort of bring the data into that report. And that's what Power BI does really well. And so here I've kind of built a simple report, and what I'm showing you is I can change sort of year, I can change department or function type. I can even interact with it like inside of the report itself. If I wanted to just click on specific month, you can just see sort of the impact of these interactions between visuals on each other. And so this is sort of like native out-of-the-box capability with Power BI, and it's part of what made it really successful. When you think about like having to do this in Excel and what it would take to just have, multiple different years and sort of filters against the data. It's cumbersome to do that in Excel. And so kind of that first barrier to entry in Power BI is to say, hey, this is what we can do. And we're happy to have those conversations. I think it's, there's many different kinds of reports for many different kinds of organizations. What we're not here to do is kind of dive into the report. What I wanted to do was show you Copilot, right? And so here's Copilot. Here's my Copilot. And what I can do is I can say, I could ask a question, right? I can just type it right here. But what's interesting is I can here's this report. This is called the nonprofit report. And so here's a list of reports, right? So I have all these things I can access here, but here I have nonprofit report. And as we showed in the slide, I want to say to Copilot, hey, go summarize this data. And what Copilot is doing is it's kind of going out, right? It's going back to, it's coming back into this report. It's opening this report in much the same way. And it's going to pull back, and here it's sort of putting it together, and it's going to provide me an answer. And what it's going to do is essentially, my directions were summarize this report. And so here's what it did. It summarized the report for me. And it's given me, again, this information at the top. This doesn't exist. So it made this part, like it created this. So this is sort of net text that didn't exist anywhere else, right? This isn't in the report. And then it pulls out visuals, right? So this visual here, okay, that's this visual here. So it's pulling out visuals from the report. It's passing them to me. It's giving me the opportunity to dig into this in more detail. It's saying, hey, if I want to explore this data further, I can actually just open this up. It's like a little sandbox, right? So I can start to interact with the data in this little sandbox and sort of, maybe I want to change the report. I want to start to just play with it and kind of like, this is a harmless way to interact with data, right? I'm not impacting anything. It's just sort of a little sandbox environment to play with it. And so with a simple text, summarize this data, I get this rich feedback from Copilot. And so that's kind of like level one of what you can do. And level two, again, is we could say, here, let's ask it, what company did the most business with us in May 2025? And now I'm using kind of very vague terms here. So the intent here is that, what do we mean business? What do we mean, did? And so Copilot is likely like processing that and starting to ask, well, I don't know, like if we haven't really set up the data well to be able to answer these questions, it's got to sort of maybe ask me to give it more clarification. And so to a degree, it's probably going to do that. So it's thinking, it's saying, I have more things I need to ask. And so it's kind of thinking through this. If you've used AIs, you know that to a certain degree, there's a little bit of wait time. And it's thinking through how it wants to respond. And what we have the opportunity to do here is kind of like kick the tires and explore what the full capabilities are of these tools. And while this is thinking, what I want to do is jump back over to a tab and show you one other capability that Copilot can do that I think is pretty impressive. And so I've moved from reading this Power BI report to editing it. And there's a little Copilot tab up here at the top. And what I can do is open this tab, and Copilot's going to ask me, hey, what can I help you with today? And I'm going to say, hey, can you suggest content for a new report page? And right out of the gate, I can say, hey, yeah, you know what? I want a project funding and expenses page. Now here, this is really cool. So I can tell Copilot to go build me a report page and watch what happens. Like my hands are off the keyboard. I'm over here. So this is Copilot now working asynchronously, building a report in Power BI, against a certain request that I had. And there it is. And so like, think about like what it would take to build this from scratch. So this is kind of just an interesting way to say, what can Copilot do? And here, we're just going to leave this one alone. It looks like we left Copilot with maybe a little too much. So point here is that I think it's pretty remarkable when you think about if you just set the stage and give it a good data model and clear direction, Copilot can build you report pages. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It means that you should, but it's a great way to get started. And so there's a lot here. I think this is kind of just scratching the surface. What we wanted to show was sort of the interaction of Copilot on this data. I'm just going to leave this one be. It looks like it doesn't want to give us an answer.
Stephen, we had couple of questions.
Yeah, by all means. We'll just let this spin while we answer.
So in Copilot, what's the difference between the work button versus the web button?
Work button searches your internal like SharePoint files, your OneDrive, your Teams chats. Like it has access to what you have access to. So if you remember in the old SharePoint experience, you used to be able to like search for documents inside of your work. You could say, it was like, and like a key example is, oh, I remember a PowerPoint presentation that Brenda gave 3 weeks ago called Copilot and Nonprofit. Like, can you find that for me? And it'll go out and see if it can find it. And so I use it for document discovery. I'll be like, oh man, there's some marketing slides that I saw a couple weeks ago. Copilot, can you find me marketing slides from the organization? That's the work side. The website is more traditional, like a GPT, like that goes out and actually like scours websites for information. So one is like external websites, the other is internal work documents.
Okay. And then the other question is more related to Fabric. So what is Fabric in relation to Power BI? And is there a future of Fabric in the roadmap for BI?
Yeah. So, and I think if you look at the top of the tabs here, you'll see some of these tabs have a Power BI symbol. And some of these, like this tab right here, actually has a Fabric symbol. And I think the important thing is that Fabric is a larger ecosystem inside of Microsoft's analytics universe that also includes Power BI. But Power BI itself is it's a standalone analytics platform. And so as a business, you can have Power BI and not have Fabric. The two worlds are kind of getting a little bit more meshed together. The Microsoft story is sort of like what Fabric does is it allows you to do a lot of the data engineering. Remember we talked about the things that Power BI will break doing, like very large joins. And so Fabric is sort of the online tool for doing data engineering and other things to prepare the data for Power BI. So think of Fabric as kind of like that data preparation, data engineering layer. Where Power BI, it can still be a standalone tool, but it's largely that sort of like last mile of what you do with your data, that reporting, that sort of analytics plane. And so Power BI kind of exists to do that last little bit of really making the data consumable.
Awesome. So it sounds like neither one of them is going anywhere.
I mean, Power BI is, yeah, it's anchored in. I mean, more and more businesses are really coming in and exploring that space. And as you can see with the capabilities here, Copilot, like the ability for people to build and develop, and I think that's one of the greatest gifts of AI is not necessarily to just save you time, but it's also an enabler. Like it enables people that didn't have web development experience to build websites. Like, you probably heard of people vibe coding or, it's going to allow people that have limited data engineering experience to start to like cleanse and sort of clean up data. It's going to help build reports faster. It's going to provide this sort of lift to allow people to do more things that maybe they didn't have. You don't have to take a 10-week Power BI training camp to be able to know how to do Power BI. You can sort of like work alongside with one of these AIs and ask questions and kind of get up to speed a lot faster. And I think, that's really one of the successful things there. And what we kind of want to end this with is showing, I think, the story here is you have a lot of data, right? There's organizations, nonprofits. It could be siloed. Maybe you already have a data environment. Like you're coming to this session with your own sort of understanding of where your organization's at. What we do at Armanino is we have these conversations. Myself and Brendan, we join calls, and part of what we try to answer is, how can we help? And I think, there's a lot of different ways that Armanino can partner with organizations to help them answer those questions. Like, hey, we have an interest in doing things with AI, but we don't really know how to start. We have, as Brenda mentioned, we have AI enablement teams. You might say, hey, you know what, we've got a ton of data, we've got a ton of Excel reports, and it's we're spending a lot of time updating these reports every month. There's answers for that. There's like, okay, well, let's talk about what it looks like to have, a refreshing Power BI report off it, or maybe we've got a ton of data and we think we need to move the direction of a data warehouse, but we don't really understand what that is. Can you come and just help us, understand what that roadmap looks like? How do we move from where we are to where we want to be? So think of us as sort of partners in this journey. I think it's helpful to have those conversations. We're glad to sort of, join a call, jump onto a meeting. Myself, a technical person, so I always enjoy just trying to see a problem or try to help organizations move from sort of that current state of what they're dealing with now to sort of that next step. And so we wanted to share our contact information here. You're welcome to reach out to us directly, ask questions. We're happy to kind of engage at that next level just to see kind of, what else you're looking for and kind of what you're thinking about. And so, we encourage you to reach out, and I'll pause to see, do we have any other questions coming through?
No, nothing else in the chat right now, but if there's any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We will definitely stick around to answer them. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, Stephen, is if somebody just wanted to play around with this and just kind of see what they can do, can they just log in to BI, connect one of those data sources that you showed and just kind of play around with it? Is there anything they need to be cautious of if they were just going to go ahead and just start playing around with it?
Yeah, so let's just talk specifics. So you would need to be able to download Power BI Desktop from the Microsoft App Store. Generally speaking, you can do that even if you don't have admin rights on your machine. So that's a simple, and it's like part of the Windows experience. You don't need a license.
Depending on whether or not your admin has allowed it, go download it.
So, and then it's a one-way street. So Power BI is only pulling data into it. It's never pushing data out. So everything
we can be fearless in here.
Yeah, exactly. Like think of it like a sandbox of just exploration, and the learning curve. I mean, again, this is a program that's been around for 10 years, but the intent here is to make it as approachable as Excel. So anyone can open Excel and say, okay, I want to make a list. And then, so in here, it's very straightforward, and they kind of try to
like
say,
Excel's bigger, badder, older cousin.
Yeah, like think of it, when Excel breaks down, you can do quite a bit. So yeah, it's a harmless place to explore. And when you reach that wall and you're like, okay, I don't, like with Excel, somebody could walk in and be writing macros and have a bunch of EBA running, and you're like, this incredible stuff. Or they can make a grocery list. And so I think that's kind of one of the interesting things with the tool set in the Microsoft universe is they try to make it approachable for individuals at all levels.
And that's really great because especially with Copilot, you don't even have to know how to go build a report in here, which, I mean, it's relatively straightforward. It really is just like a pivot table on steroids, if you will, where you're bringing in all your data sources. If you have multiple data sources, you got to create that relational table. Anybody that has ever done any SQL coding or tried to write a macro in Excel probably sounds familiar there. But then with Copilot, like you said, like that project forecast and projections dashboard, just build it for me. Much easier to go into those and say, oh, those aren't our departments. Let me switch that to a different data source rather than go build that entire report or graph or visualization from scratch. Much easier to have Copilot do a draft and then you go edit it. I find that there's nothing scarier for me than a blank page. And so anything that I can do to give me a leg up or just do some red lines. Where do you go to download Power BI? You mentioned the Microsoft App Store. Is that something that everybody has available?
Yep.
Is that a website?
If you're on a Windows machine, you just type apps and it'll bring up the App Store. It's like natively installed on most Windows machines. So you will see it there. The Copilot, it's worth mentioning, Copilot does require a license. So where Power BI, the barrier to entry is just go download it from the App Store. Copilot, especially the Copilot experiences that are embedded inside of like Office products like Word, that requires a license. And so that's a little bit more of somebody in your organization either has to purchase the licenses and then provision that license to you. And so there's a couple steps there. Again, certainly we're happy to talk through like what that process looks like, but you have to get that activated first to get the full featured Copilot. Like there are things, like I'm sure if you look on your computer right now, there's a Copilot but you're only going to have access to like a limited piece of the bigger breadth of what these tools can do. And so,
and I think that's
the
important. And we had a couple of questions about security and permissions. And if I upload a spreadsheet, is that available to the whole internet? In some cases, yes. It does depend on the type of license that you are operating within. If you have a paid license, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are not sharing your data. It means that you are paying for a higher level of service. So something to keep in mind is make sure that when you are operating with a Copilot, you can check in the top right-hand corner if you have a little green shield that says Enterprise Data Protection applies to this chat, then your information is not being shared with the wider internet. If you don't see that, you will want to be cautious about what you share, best used for responding to emails and not for financially sensitive, confidential spreadsheets.
And it's worth adding, like Copilot adopts your permissions. And so if you like, let's say I take an Excel file and just for fun, it's the salaries of everyone at the organization. And I share that, put that Excel file in a location where it's shared, like indirectly shared with everyone, or if like Copilot will see that. And so to the point of security, it's like you have to be careful about, where and how you share documents, especially sensitive documents, because you might have something that's out there from 3 years ago that you shared across the whole organization. And now most people would never find that, right? It's like, who would ever find this thing in this SharePoint folder that's 3-4 years old, that's been sitting around like obsoleted?
Yeah, but
Copilot
nobody's accessed since Francis left.
So yeah, it's a case in point that Copilot is very good, and SharePoint was very good at this before. But just there should be a good caution about how and where you share things, especially like sensitive documents, because that is a concern if you're not sharing it appropriately.
And I will say that when clients come to us to embark on an AI project, oftentimes the first project we need to do with them is a data cleanup project, because we need to get your data into a state that's permissionable, where people can access it. If you're using, we had the F drive, which was, a shared server where we were storing things before the evolution of SharePoint and Teams and OneDrive and all of that. There may be a migration process. As part of that migration process, use it as an opportunity to clean things up and leave behind that spreadsheet with everybody's salaries on it from 4 years ago. So it's something to think about is garbage in, garbage out. Before, somebody, like Stephen said, somebody had to know that was there and then search in the right way to get that up. Now you can say, bring me up any spreadsheet that mentions the word salaries that I have access to, and it's going to find that. And so it makes that access to data both faster, which is both great and also a little bit scary. And so we were, like Stephen said, happy to be your partners on this journey. If there's any questions that we can answer for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. The slides and this recording will be available if you want to share it with anybody at your organization or would like to follow up. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.